Today in the podcast, we're going to be talking about money and ways to make your money work for you. We're going to be thinking through different life stages as children, youth, young adults, middle-aged adults, older adults, and even ways to make your money make a difference after you're gone. So today it's a conversation with Joel Malone and Don Lawhorn. Welcome to the Central Conversations podcast. Today, I want to introduce two special guests to the podcast, Don Lawhorn and Joel Malone. Don obtained 2 degrees in behavioral science and accounting. He enjoyed a 30-year career in auditing and financial sales within Blue Cross Blue Shield. He also is retired from the Army and the Army Reserve, and Don is also the chair of our finance committee at our church at Central. Joel Malone is a native of Lenoir City and a 4th-generation member of Central. He graduated from the University of Tennessee with a degree in finance and also graduated from the Graduate School of Banking of the South at LSU. He spent over 40 years in the financial services industry and has been the financial manager, the business manager of our church since 2012. And I can tell you just from personal experience, they're both baseball fans and they love to go to baseball games together. And so as we wanted to provide something that would be helpful to folks on finances, I'm just grateful that you guys could give us a little bit of your time. So thanks, Don. Thanks, Joel, very much. So I'll just start off. Tell us, for those of us watching here, some of the things you learned about money growing up. What were some of your early experiences with money?
Well, for me, the big thing was that you could buy things with it. And as a kid, if you got a nickel, and back then a nickel would actually buy some things, that was a big deal. And the other thing I learned is if you saved money and opened a savings account at the bank, they would give you more money. They would give you interest. And I love that. I love going to the bank and giving them my little passbook and they'd put more money in it. I love that. And one of the things I told Don yesterday, I don't remember it being this much, but maybe it's inflation. I don't know. But I learned early on that a penny was very, you should never discount a penny, because if you double a penny every day for a month, in a month's time, it will amount to more than $5.3 million. And that has always impressed me. And tell my kids, they say, oh, that's just a penny. Well, pennies mount up.
What about you, Don?
I grew up in a family with 4 children, and we were not poor by any means, but we didn't have a lot of money either. And I can remember my parents sitting around after dinner. I was telling Joel, my parents would drink coffee till bedtime. I don't know how they did that, but they would sit around the table and they would discuss money and discuss priorities with the money. And I learned at an early age, just through watching and listening, that families should deliberate and make wise decisions and prioritize financial issues, because money is not limitless. And then when I got to high school age, I was expected to have a summer job every summer, and not during the school year, because I was expected to go out and find a job. And I always had the kind of jobs that made me want to get an education, hard, hot, sweaty jobs. And that might have been one of my parents' purposes as well.
Yeah, they want to teach you the value of money, right? And work hard. And this podcast really is a result of some conversations that were suggestions that were made to me that I'd like to hear about some ways to better manage money. And so, what are some of the money mistakes that you've made over the years, or that you wish you could do over again?
I'll take that one. Um, I think without a doubt, the biggest mistake I made was not getting serious about retirement saving until I was in my late 30s. Um, and, it's in retrospect, a 20-something-year-old full-time worker maybe just doesn't visualize the golden years very well, but they do slip up on you. And, I had to hustle and do some things to make up for that late start I had with my retirement savings.
So really for you was in your late 30s where retirement really became on the focal. I need to plan ahead.
Everything started closing in, college savings for 3 kids, retirement. And I had not gotten an early start.
Gotcha. Yeah. What about you, Joel?
Well, I have several, and one of mine is the same as, and you'll hear us repeat a lot of this stuff over and over again. We laughed about that yesterday when we talk about it. Priorities is a big deal, and retirement savings is a big deal. But one of my biggest ones was not saving more when I was younger, and when I bought my first house, I bought exactly what I could afford at that moment. As a matter of fact, my first house payment was less than my rent payment. And that was a time when houses were really appreciating and that sort of thing. And if I just stretched myself and gone for a little bit bigger house and take into consideration that I was going to get raises and promotions and things like that, I could afford it. And but I was so afraid to go in debt and not be able to afford it that I just underbought really. And then probably, I guess it was during the recession, my IRA that when I retired from the bank had really dropped in value because the stock market had just gone south. And my broker said I ought to really consider switching it all into a Roth IRA. And at the time, because things were so bleak, I just could not come up with the money that I'd have to pay in taxes to do that conversion. And I didn't. But if I had today, when I'm drawing out my retirement account, I would be saving 20, 30% because I wouldn't be paying taxes on it. But I passed that up and I should have done it. And I guess my biggest piece of advice is don't beat yourself up when you do make a mistake, because you're using the information that you have at that time in those circumstances, and don't look back and beat yourself up for it.
That's a good word. That's a good word. And what I'm hearing really is a theme is just be able to think beyond your current circumstances. I was telling you just a little earlier, my worst purchase was a 1980 Volkswagen Rabbit. I had to get that car when I was 18, and I did not plan on anything breaking. And I did not really think through the whole paying all the insurance thing over time. So I just wondered if I put that money in a good mutual fund, that would be so much of a better purchase.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of walk through kind of stations of life over the next few minutes. And so starting from kind of young years to older years. So as you think about, children and youth and parents, as you think about grandparents, how do you, or what advice would you give to teach children or youth about the value of money?
Go ahead,
Joel.
I think giving a kid an allowance is real important, just to teach them the value of money. Give them, money for completing some jobs. There's some, by just being in a family, there's some things you need to do, but, like mowing the yard or something, give them a couple of bucks or whatever. And then when they want to spend that money, teach them to think about it before they do. Questions like, what do I want? Is it worth it? How long will it last? And this is the biggie, is remind them how long it took to save that money to buy that. They want something silly, or in my opinion, silly, but something silly that maybe it's taken them 2 years to accumulate. And you just think, do you really want it that bad? I have to ask myself that sometimes too, even now.
That's a good point. Well, what about you, Don?
Going back to the way I was raised, Scott, I would just encourage parents to be as transparent as possible with children at a level appropriate for their age, about financial priorities for the family, about budgets, about limitations. I don't think children should be sheltered from that. I don't think that really prepares them for life. Now, that being said, discussing is great. Arguing is not good. So there's a limit to that. But I think it's good for kids to hear their parent or their parents and understand just all the decisions and priorities that have to be juggled within a family.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I heard out on some podcast somewhere that the Great Recession in like 2008, of how that affected the youth that are now that Generation Z, like my oldest son Aiden, his age, 24, and how that affected they're more spendthrift. They don't want to spend things. I'd be curious to see how this pandemic really affects over the years financial stewardship, in a sense, from kids and youth. So let's kind of fast forward to just thinking, when you get out of high school or get out of college or out of the military, and you're starting your career, what are some of the considerations that people should make regarding their money?
I'll take that one first. One of the topics that Joel and I kept going back to yesterday is the topic of financial literacy. Whether you're interested in financial stuff, whether you have an aptitude for it or not, to adequately plan for living, year-to-year living, and planning for long-term goals, you got to be literate. You got to understand the terminology, and there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of good non-credit courses out there at junior colleges. You can subscribe to a magazine and just read it every month and become financially literate. And then budgeting, when it comes to financial preparedness, the topic of budgeting can't be overemphasized. And it starts as soon as you start making money, whether you're 12 or whether you're 32, you got to have a budget. If you want to accomplish anything in life with any degree of complexity, you got to have a plan. And the budget is the plan.
Yeah, your budget tells you where you want your money to go, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Joel, how about you?
Pretty much the same thing. One of the things I regret I didn't do is negotiate my salary more, push and try to get more. But work hard, and you'll hear this throughout this, is max out your 401k.
Yeah. So how do you do that though, when, usually your first job, you're not making what you would like and you have expenses?
Right.
Those are great ideas, but a lot of times it's really difficult. What advice would you kind of, where you're coming to push comes to shove, how do you make that work?
We do it just like we talk about people that want to tithe at the church, is you do it in increments. And maybe you can't do it in the beginning, and just start out trying to do 1% or some small percentage, and then just set your goal after that to increase it 1% a year, or every time you get a raise, increase it by some amount. Don and I we know that we've heard this before. We couldn't find it anywhere, but there was a study or something done a few years ago that if you started just giving the minimum amount to an IRA when you first get out with your very first job, and say then somebody, one of your friends doesn't put anything in that 401k or that IRA in the beginning, but they decide about 10 years later, they're going to put significantly more than what you've been putting in, because you started earlier, even with a small amount. They will never surpass you as far as their contributions to the retirement account. And again, you start out early and put what you can in, and then just try to incrementally increase it as time goes by.
Yeah, the value of time, right?
Yep.
Yeah. That's good. I'm wondering, I guess, since you mentioned budgeting, um, people know generally you should have a budget, but often find it difficult to do that. I know over the years, me personally, we've done different things of recording our expenses for 30 days or record it for 7 days, and you kind of develop that. Um, so a lot of people know they should have a budget, but yet, man, they just don't do that at all. And how do you, what would you say to that family who just, I know I should be doing that?
Well, I'll take that one. You know, you can do a budget on the back of an envelope. You can make it as simple or as complex as you want to. In thinking about our discussion today, I just went online a couple of days ago to see what kind of tools are out there today for budgeting. And, you know, back 40 years ago, you'd go to the bookstore and get you a paperback self-help book. But today, there's all kinds of free stuff on the internet out there, and it's at the most elementary level. So it's budgeting is not that complex, and it's a pretty inexact science when you start out. What you're basically trying to do is just, what are my priorities? What's the highest priority? What's the lowest priority? And then plug some numbers, and of course, ultimately you want to save some money. You want to have a rainy day savings fund, but it takes time. It's not something that a young individual will master in the first year, but it's just you mentioned the concept of time. Time will make you an expert on your budget and your lifestyle priorities.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that idea of priorities. One of the things I usually do in my marriage, premarital counseling before I marry somebody is, you know, what are your goals the next 3 to 5 years? And then be able to structure that. So for sometimes it's to buy a house, or we're going to have kids or something like that, and then be able to think backwards to accomplish that goal.
Mhm.
So, Joel, anything on budgeting that you want to share?
Pretty much the same thing. Is yeah, it's the same thing. And what I found being in banking for so long, and I was on the collection side too, it was amazing to me how many people would let their house payment go and to pay something that wasn't very important. And so they were willing to sacrifice their home for, you know, a vacation or something like that. It blew my mind. You know, you've got fixed expenses, and those are the things that you need to pay for, you know, need to pay first. And then whatever's left is what you spend on food and the fun things in life. And if you find out you don't have enough of that, then you probably need to reevaluate some of your fixed expenses. Is there a way to save money there? And if you're buying a $6 latte every day at a coffee shop, you might need to cut that back, both to save money and to keep from gaining weight. Anyway, it's amazing, and how, you know, say you need $100 more a month. If you cut out that $6 latte, you'd have that money without any problem.
Yeah. I know when Kate and I were early in our marriage, we had like a $50 limit. In other words, we wouldn't spend, we'd have to have a conversation about if we're going to spend something, you know, more expensive, so that we're actually talking about our money and not just letting it go. And next thing you know, we're like, oh, we got to pay that credit card bill. So, um, but we all have made mistakes. I've made a number of them over the years. Is there any simple formula that you kind of would share that has been helpful for you as you put together your own priorities, or the way you have allowed your money to, in a sense, be spent over your life?
Well,
Go
of
ahead,
course, being in banking, there were always, loan to value and debt to income ratios and all that sort of thing. And so I was always very conscious of that to make sure, you hear people buy these huge houses and you think, how much income do they have? They've got to have quite an income to be able to afford that house. And I can assure you that's not what their income is. And so they're overbuying, and then they're just going to be strapped the rest of their life. And that's a long-term investment, and can get them in trouble real quick. And that's not one you can't, you've got to make that payment every month or you're going to lose the house. And then the other thing, when you buy a house, you've got to always consider is there's other things besides just the house payment. You got to pay utilities, you got to pay insurance, you got to mow the yard, you got to buy a lawnmower, all these things that go along with it. So it's not just a house payment.
Right. Okay. That's a good point. What about you, Don?
I told Joel yesterday, thinking about this question, I was reminded about my dad and the three things he preached to me about financial management. And those were always live well within your income. Don't live up to your income. You got to live within it. Minimize your spending on depreciating assets, and automobiles are, at the top of that list. Spend as little as possible on that stuff, and then have as much of a rainy day fund as you can, because stuff is going to go wrong, and debt will kill a budget faster than anything. Unexpected bills and debt payments will kill a budget. So try to stay out of debt as much as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that depreciating asset thing, because it's often some of the people who are most well off that I know. Many of them, drive and buy used cars on purpose, because they just know it's not always the best investment to buy a new car. Um, the way I tend to think about it is, and I learned this later in my life that I wish I knew, was I guess the culture kind of communicates, spend what you have, kind of live, then save some, and then giving is at the end. And, trying to change, to flip that is just to give, to give first, and then to save, and then to live. And so the way I've tried to allocate, not always perfect by any stretch, but, give 10% away, save 10%, and try to live on the 80%. Um, that's the way I've tried to live. So let's talk about college. And I have three in college. You all have gotten your kids through college. What would you recommend about college funding?
I'll
Save
go.
money.
I've just finished educating three. I told Joel yesterday, the first thing a parent should do is to go out there and really become familiar with all the sources of funding and loans that are out there. They're incredible. The work study programs, there's a lot of information. You may end up paying for a good amount of a child's college, but you really need to explore the options for scholarships, grants, work study programs, military GI Bill. They're out there. I also told Joel a story yesterday that was a reminder of a financial principle, and that is an adult should never sacrifice their retirement saving to cover college bills for a child. That there's a lot of assistance, financial assistance out there to pay for college. There's none out there to pay for retirement. And that is something that a lot of loving, but I think misguided parents, a mistake a lot of people make.
Yeah, they put their kids first because out of love, and they don't plan for themselves. What about you, Joel?
Pretty much the same thing. One thing is to open a 529 account and put your money in that. Used to think you had to have one for each kid. You don't, you just have to have one and you can pay for all the kids out of that one. What we run into in our family is kids have everything, and on their birthdays and whatnot, they don't need more toys. We usually give them one small toy and then give the parents a $100 check to put in their college fund. And same thing at Christmas. I know my parents do it, and my wife's parents do it. And you know, it's not a huge amount, but again, back to the pennies. You know, every little bit helps. And so hopefully, by the time they get to be in college, they'll have some money accumulated. My parents saved for me, and you know, at the time when they started it, it didn't cost a whole lot to go to college. And by the time I got old enough to go, it wasn't nearly enough money. And but my parents sacrificed and put me through school.
Mm. Well, I tell you, that's a great idea of birthday gifts. I think that's one that I need to lodge in my brain. And basically, you know, the 529 plan is basically that you invest the money, it grows, and you take it out tax free. So
Yeah, it's kind of like an IRA, you know.
yeah, yeah. And another thing you mentioned, Don, about the scholarship piece, which I think is a good point. A lot of time, well, living in Tennessee, the nice thing is that you can do 2 years free college and then transfer. So I've seen more and more people do that. I've also seen sometimes, I can think of this one um, uh, young man that I knew who was really smart, and he was really, really concerned about being able to pay for college, but he got a full ride scholarship and it paid for everything. But his sights were just simply, I'm just going to go to the local community college and then I'll transfer to UT or something like that. But when the sites were bigger, he ended up getting a 4-year institution full ride, you know, so don't underestimate that for sure. Um, well, you've mentioned about retirement planning, 401k, Roth IRAs a little bit. Can you talk, you know, I'm just imagining people at different stages of life watching this, um, what you have done or what you would recommend trying to do just as you plan for your retirement?
Well, again, same. It sounds like a broken record. Put as much as you can into your 401k. I have a relative he was a bank executive and is very well off. And he always said, put as much as you can that is tax deferred and that has a high appreciation rate, like bank stocks, things like that. Buy as much as you can, and then whatever's left, that's what you spend. And like I say, he's done very well. But yeah, maxing out. You know, the thing, going back to what I said about putting money into a 401k, if your company matches any portion, say like the first 3%, you're a fool if you don't put 3% in, because that's 100% return on your money right there. Even if it doesn't earn anything in interest or appreciation from a stock or whatever, you've doubled your money right there. And you just got to do it. And yes, it's hard in the very beginning, but over time you'll never miss it.
Okay. And I should say this, I know that you all are not professional financial advisors, you know, just all that, but you're just telling out your own experience. So, Don, how about you? What would you say? Would you just reiterate that or some other thoughts?
I would. I will tell you from my experience. I mentioned how I struggled in my 20s and 30s with funding long-term objectives, retirement saving and college saving. Uh, in my mid to late 30s, I got a second job. Uh, I joined the Army Reserve, and after an extensive active duty background, and and the primary reason was to fund college and to fund and allow enough money in our budget to adequately save for retirement. I did that for 15 years, and it helped immensely. I've got a good friend who, and it helps if you really enjoy your part-time job. I have a friend who works 12 hours a day every Saturday at a golf course, and he loves it, but he makes money for long-term savings. I mean, that's what he does. So that works for him. And I would encourage people maybe to think about that in their early years, where their earning capacity has not really grown enough to fund those long-term goals. Think about a part-time job that is not a burden, that is something you enjoy.
Yeah. Well, now I want to ask you another question based on that, because I'm amazed at how many people that I've talked to over time, they don't understand anything about where to put my money. I put in the 401k, so should I put it all in the money market or the bonds? I'm amazed that they have no idea. Uh, can you give just a general guide as you think through maybe life stages, and even if you're 65 and retiring, in terms of cash, bonds, and stocks, any of those types of things?
Well, the rule of thumb is whatever your age is, that's how much you put into fixed, into bonds, things that are safer. So if you're 55 years old, 55% of your investment should be in very safe stuff. You shouldn't be spending 100% on very volatile stocks. That's just not smart.
Yeah, I agree with Joel. I mentioned financial literacy a little while ago, but I can't overemphasize that. Every individual, whether you're really interested in it or not, needs to be financially literate. And there are, of course, financial advisors out there that are available to help. And I sort of managed my own financial affairs till I got within about 5 years of retirement. And then I acquired a financial advisor who helped me think through some of the more complex issues that like Social Security claiming strategies and things like that I hadn't really considered. So the advisors are really good. You mentioned diversification, Scott, and the investment companies, the mutual fund companies, make it so simple today. They have these life strategy products that are an all-in-one product, and you don't need to make any changes as you age. Your product diversification changes to match your investment horizon. So it can be as simple as you want to make it.
Yeah. No, that's really true. They've tried to make it easier for people. And of course, you have to always manage your own risk tolerance if you're a more safer individual or you like to take risks. One thing I've learned recently, that the fastest growing population in the United States are those over 90. So as you think about, longevity and inflation, you have to continue to be aggressive even when you get older, because of just keeping up with inflation. So just important consideration.
But you have to make sure you don't outlive your money, so you got to have plenty of money. You got to think longer, I guess.
Yeah. And Don, you kind of mentioned this a little bit as you think about retirement, and maximizing your income and whatnot. I know it pays to talk with somebody who understands tax implications and whatnot. But what's some advice that you give for folks as they think about, maximizing their income for their lifetime?
Well, again, not to sound like a broken record, but it's even in retirement, budgets are important. And that's really where a financial advisor comes in handy. They have some software that can show you your given your investment assets, given your expected lifespan, what are the probabilities that you will not outlive your money, and they can help you develop a number for a budget. But again, unless you're extremely wealthy, budgets probably become even more critical in the retirement years than they are in the working years.
For sure. And some people never actually, quote unquote, retire. They just find another outlet for their expressions of their lifestyle. Joel, what about you?
Well, I mean, I agree with everything he said, and just reevaluate annually your decisions and whatnot. We just evaluated mine recently, and I've done better than I expected, and so I could actually take a little bit more money out of retirement. I'm not going to do that right now, and but it's just something you need to do to make sure that you meet your goals. I want to make sure that when I do retire and my wife retires, that we don't have to go from riches to rags, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. I want to have pretty close to the same lifestyle.
And in some cases, to your point about, just thinking about the past year in terms of the stock market and whatnot, maybe you want to lock in some of your gains and reallocate for when things go down.
Right. And again, what Don talked about is having a financial advisor, somebody that can look over things and can tell you, hey, we need to switch out of this, or we need to get in more into this, or whatever. And he's the one that told me the other day. He said you could actually take more money out if you wanted to. And I said, no, I'm okay. So that I'll just let that money compound.
It's been said that there's going to be, I don't know the actual number, trillions of dollars in the next 10 to 15 years transfer from one generation to the next. What about as you think about legacy of, kind of you have budgets and whatnot. I think as you get older, you also think about your longevity, how you want your money to make a difference. What are the things that are important to you? Any advice that you would give as people are thinking about, either legacy gifts or how they want to structure their wills, things like that to consider?
Well, personally, out of my state, 10% will go to the church. But I think if you have any charity or anything that you really have a passion for, a foundation or whatever, it's good to do that planning. But I guess that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Joel. Just like a good budget starts with step one, which is what are my financial priorities? And in doing estate or legacy planning, it's no different. What are your financial priorities? I mean, what difference do you want to make? I mean, do you have children and grandchildren or not? And what's important to me? Is it my church and its faith mission? Is it a nonprofit? And again, a financial advisor can help you think through those things, along with, an attorney that would help you with your life documents.
Absolutely. I always remember, I think a class when John Wesley talked about money. He talked about, make all you can, save all you can, give all you can, do as much to help as many people as you can. But he also talked about, even for people as they think about their kids, he encouraged them to think like, say you got 3 kids, uh, to give each of your kids 25% and give a 25% to the church or to to the Lord. And uh, it's funny, Joel, you mentioned that, but Kate and I recently redid our wills ourselves, and we made that whatever church that I'm a part of at that time to give 10% of my estate to them. Um, just because it indicates it's a witness to your family, right? About what's
Yep.
most important to you.
Yep.
So,
And if we can't stress enough, everybody needs to have a will. Everybody, from the youngest to the oldest. Um, and it's really critical when you're young and have young children, because, heaven forbid, you and your wife get uh, killed in a car wreck. Who's going to take care of those kids? Where's the money going to come from? All those different things, and yeah, who is going to take custody of those kids? Have you ever thought about that? And and the same thing as you get older, who's going to take care of your money when you can't take care of it anymore? All that kind of stuff. There's just all kinds of things to think about. That's when an attorney can really advise you. And a will is not something you just get today and forget about. It has to be evaluated ever so often, at least every 5 years. I mean, I need to have mine redone right now. Mine was made when I had minor children. My children are all grown now, but I've got grandchildren, so I want to remember my grandchildren now in the will. So they'll probably get a portion of that to help pay for their college.
yeah. And remember, this is being recorded, Joel. No, just
I
joking.
know. Well, you can cut that out.
Don, anything you'd like to say on that?
No, I think Joel covered it really well.
Good. Last question is just thinking through, we all have mentioned faith. How has faith kind of impacted your financial decisions over your lifetime?
I've talked about this before, and I'll just repeat it. I struggled with budgeting and limited income for the first 15, 18 years of my adult life. And but I will tell you, and this sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I really believe it happened in my life when I made the personal decision, when Carolyn and I made the personal decision that we wanted to step up to tithing. You would think budgeting would become even more complicated at that point, but for whatever reason, it didn't. That was about the time that God opened up that part-time job opportunity to me, and once you establish God's work, the church, its mission as your top priority, your number one item in your personal budget. In my case, it just seemed like all the rest of the subordinate items just sort of fell into place. And, I can't really explain it, but that has been my experience. And I would really encourage everyone to, in the area of personal financial management, to really take that first step seriously. And that is, what are my life priorities? And those become your financial priorities, and then live those through your budget.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, even if you're not necessarily a big person of faith or a Christian or whatnot, being a generous person, it always seems to come back to you. Sort of like, are you a giver or are you a taker? If you're a giver, things come back to you in ways that you can't explain. But if it's all about you and accumulation, you'll never have enough.
Agree.
Joel?
Right. Pretty much the same thing. I kind of did the incremental thing, worked up to tithing, but and then you got into that debate: is it on net or gross? But and then when I retired, part of my money I'd already given that I was taking, out of my retirement, I'd already given on that. I thought it was too confusing. So I just started gross. Whatever I get, I just give to the church, 10%. And I never think anything about it. It's just something we feel very strongly about. If we ever have any kind of financial issue or whatever, cutting back from the church is never one of the solutions to the problem.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things talking about faith is there are times where I worked for folks that I had to really question whether it lined up to my faith, and because what I was being asked to do or whatever just didn't align with what I believed. And I've had discussions with pastors in the past about that, and now I've got the best job in the world.
That's awesome. Well, we're grateful that you are here at the church, Joel, in your position. I'm thankful for, Don, for your leadership with our finances. And, it's been a challenging year last year, but yet it's been a great way to see how God provided and just try to be a good steward of his resources. And once again, the reason why we're doing this podcast, if you've watched till the end, I just want to say that we're doing this hopefully just to help you make wise decisions with your finances so that you can accomplish the kind of things that you want to accomplish with your life. So, Don, Joel, thanks for your time and your wisdom and expertise. So thank you very much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks a lot.